Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to the batch video for the web novel Thieves Dungeon from the website Royal Road. This video will contain chapters 2.33 and the epilogue. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 2.33 Mutual Annihilation. I don't have any more arrows left. Tyrna should have prepared more, should have set out for a war and not a hunt. A few more arrows, healing bombs, and this was so much she could have brought, if she had known. Do you have anything made of wood? Anything you can spare? Maher asked. Drake hummed and hawed for a moment before reluctantly handing over his staff. Here. The mage fumbled his spellwork on the first try, the golden letters sparkling and falling apart as he wove them around his hands. The next attempt held, the runic designs collapsing into a rotating wheel, as she watched the wooden staff begin to writhe like a snake, slowly breaking apart into dozens of wooden arrows. Most of them were warped or bent, but one was perfect. She took it, split the end off with a knife and threaded a feather that she'd been taken from the terror birds above. One arrow, one shot. Ahead of them the darkness was a solid thing, a sea of ink. Strange movements at the corner of her eyes threatened rushing out, but never did. Phantasmal serpents writhed in the dark. Scuttling of spiders was suggested by the black forms that dissolved as Drake stepped forward with a lantern, shooing the murk away. Grey fields and white trees, the old man sent a ghastly rabbit forward, searching the way for traps. As soon enough he found one. There was a pitfall hidden beneath the endless flower beds. It looked as if the blossoms had devoured a rabbit, opening up to swallow it whole. It was gone. They circled around, the bard drawing a long, thin rapier from the side to test the earth. They found a glass bridge, the light of the lantern smearing across the pale surface. It was a beautiful span of soft green, numerous columns descending from an arch that was drifting of half-melted candle. A welcome sight to the colourless expanse of the flowers. Their footsteps rang as they crossed. Ahead, the earth was littered with boulders and shifted slightly, that couldn't quite hide their breathing. The group edged away, skirting the lurking monsters. Flowers brushed at Chinna's legs constantly. She took one step forward, and there were butterflies that burst up from below, filling the air as the fluttering spiral. Their wings aglow, beautiful, scaled in colors of luminous purple and midnight blue, eerie, beetle green, and palest white, scatterings of dark rainbows filling the blackness that had become so oppressive. The lights flickered and played, and swooped and turned, wings open and closing as the butterflies sailed gently around her, and Tiana stood, hypnotized, unable to move, to even think of moving. Tiana! Maher pulled on her arm, and she stepped back suddenly. It was that one little step that saved her life. A long, pale spike of bone slammed through the earth where she had been standing, spreading the butterfly in half. She looked in horror as the colorful wings twitched their last. That could have been her. Somewhere out there in the gloom that swum with phantoms, there was a real enemy, an archer. As she watched, the silk threads that trailed behind the harpoon pulled taut. The spear's barbed head ripped free of the dark earth, and the weapon slid away into the darkness. Drag! Her voice was shocking in the silence. Until then, the loudest noise that had been her breathing, lifting and falling in ragged gasps as the closeness of her brush with death made her whole body tremble. Take Maher, I have something to do. Thrusting the blind man into her comrade's arms, she let them go ahead. Alone, surrounded by the spectres of spiders and serpents, Tiana stood in absolute stillness, listening, waiting. The dungeon's attention was turned to her, its malevolent presence a great eye bearing down. She could hear it speaking. Kill her. She could feel the force of hatred for her, a paranoid need to see her destroyed, coming boiling through the earth, bitterly present in the air, making the phantoms in the dark dance and leer. Now, she whispered, and felt the dungeon shock as she stepped aside. The bow and harpoon pierced through the darkness, impaling the ground where she had stood. Her arrow lifted to match the arc of the silk line trailing behind the spear. Tiana let the shot fly, and saw a shuddering jerk run through the silk line as her arrow struck the mark on the other end. This time the harpoon wasn't pulled back. No living thing remained on the other end of that thread. Taking a knife from her boot, she sawed through the silk and lifted the harpoon. brandishing it like a spear as she turned to catch up with her companions, trying to catch up with that bobbing, swaying blot of the lantern light. Ahead, a clear, crystalline note rang out as they stepped a foot onto the bridge. All around her the boulders shuddered and came to life, rising up eight-legged and terrible. Tiana ran faster, something sharp ripping across her legs. Then turning back and saw blood on the flowers where they brushed her. She didn't look down. It was better not to know. Ahead, her companions were running, trying to clear the bridge as living stones rushed to block them. And they ran desperately, Mahur stumbling and clinging onto Driag's hand as they tried to get off the narrow bridge before they trapped aboard it. They made it, just a stone leg crushing down inches away from Driag. She had no such luxury. By the time she reached the bridge, the far end was already blockaded. With her heart beating hard in her chest, drumming out the seconds that she had left to live, Tiana leapt out onto the bridge's palisades and jumped again, aiming to clear the hidden gap beneath. And she missed. Just. The toe of Tiana's boot scraped the earth as it crumbled away, and her foot plunged down, her body tearing through the flowers into the dark below. She caught the earth with her fingernails, clawing, fighting to stay, to not go tumbling into the waiting abyss. The bone spear fell, and she dragged her way up, panting, her body starting to go numb to adrenaline after what felt like years of being poisoned by the stuff, spending every moment on the border of life and death. Her muscles were stiff and cramping. If this didn't end soon, she would curl up and die of exhaustion, or she would simply make a mistake. One mistake. Shaking her head, fighting to clear the confusion of her sour thoughts, Tiana rushed on, chasing her comrades, looking for the next bridge, the next island, the next challenge. When she found them, when she reached the two of them, there were only two. Mahur, she asked, and Drag and the bowed girl both stared at her with sad eyes. Gone. They moved together over the glass bridge, lantern held high. In the darkness of the vast form shifted. It was draconic and enormous, a rock-scaled lizard. Dry and dark dirt formed on its underbelly, and it cracked between its craggy armor. Tusks of flint extended from its mouth, and jagged spines of obsidian flowing in the ridge of its spine. It shifted, and metal clanked, huge chains attached to its two enormous trees. On three, we run. They were past the point of fighting, but if they ran, one of them might make it. They were close. They could feel fear in the enemy's heart. The presence of the dungeon that had followed her to this point, the way she sensed its moods and thoughts rippling through the air, they were all tinged with panic. This was the final hurdle. No, it's an elemental. I can do this. I can bind it, the bard said, holding up a hand. You two go. I'll be safe. She lifted her violin to her chin, turning the strings as she stepped forward to the Goliath lizard shifted, reaching for her with a tremendous paw, and then she began to play. It was beautiful. I came to realize that I had never really heard music before. I'd seen the worst of these humans were capable of, but still, I could recognize the beauty in that music. Rose and bow drew rich, stirring noises from the strings, straining long notes that drove and rose and stirring fiery thoughts as her fingers nimbly moved across the pegs, tuning. And then she really began to play, and a phantom wind surrounded her, sweeping the flowers to sway their heads and bounce, a mock dance to the blurring, weeping sounds that filled the air. The claws of the lizard paused, half-curled around her body. The creature lifted its head towards the air, seeing something that I could not. Lost in some fantasy, it swayed slightly, insensate at the two adventurers creeping past. The song was all. I knew that much just from hearing it. The feeling of resonation in the air in a tune with the soar of a bow across the violin. In the background, ghostly instruments joined, echoes of past performances. They were a history soaked in tears to the song. It was then that I noticed Breaksong creeping towards her, his flute clutched in his hand. Maybe it was a purposeful sabotage, maybe he simply wanted to join the wonderful song. Either way, he lifted his pipe to his lips and played a single discordant note. And the spell was broken. No! I tried to stop the lizard, but it was too late. The claws crushed her, and the violin, they squeezed until her form vanished beneath the stone talons, and blood dripped out. With a violent snarl, the earth lizard turned, lashing its tail out towards the two who were running now, fleeing full tilt. The motion ripped the flowers from the earth and sprayed clods of black dirt in their direction. They were coming for me. They were climbing the walls, climbing up the engravings of the vast trees, towards the open mouth of the enormous face with its wild hair and staring eyes. And in one of those eyes, a cold green gem glimmered. Me. They were so damn close. Argent and Aram stood together, ready to fight, ready to defend me to the bitter last. The serpent rose towards the ceiling, its green gold scales glimmering, its scathe-like mantis claws ripping the air with twitching readiness for blood. Aram was already a gleam of moonlight holding the mane of dagger in her jaws. They climbed over the lip, bloodied and exhausted, their eyes inscrutable. Exhaustion and hope, desperation and anger. All those things and something more. Something human. That I'd never glimpsed in any of my creatures. This girl, she almost seemed to be able to read my thoughts. I wanted to believe in Aram. I wanted him to crush the life out of them. But I was afraid of losing him. I was afraid of losing these two, who'd overcome every challenge, one way or another. Aram was strong but mortal. One slip up, one perfect shot through the eye, and he would fall like Kovachan had fallen. Argent stepped forward, laying the dagger before them. We stood on the brink of mutual annihilation. It was time to bargain. Tiana didn't have the will to fight the old man. She saw the greed in him, the gleeful want, and it was stronger than any emotion that she could muster. What she had left was spite burning in the pit of her stomach. Spite that told her to bet it all, to fight the vast serpent that stood before her, to live or die uncompromising. "We have to bargain," Dreag said, grasping her shoulder. But that wasn't true, was it? He wanted to bargain. He wanted power and riches, wanted the dungeon had to offer. She wanted to reclaim the lives it had taken. She wanted vengeance. "No, we have to." He slapped her. The pain stung, but not as bad as his words. "What about Henry, What about Carora, injured and too weak to fight? No way back. What about me, Save your moral crusade for when you're alone." She had no response. She sat, knelt on the cold stone as she stepped nervously into the great snake's shadow, and lifted the blade and cut himself. The rat seized the dagger in her jaws and scuttled past Tiana, climbing the walls. So that was where the core was hiding, Tiana thought. And someday she promised that she would put the knowledge to use. But for today, for the sake of others, she would bargain. "You will let us go peacefully and without harm. You shall not harm me or my creatures on your way. You will grant me an attunement in exchange for your book, your most powerful attunement, and the girl. She will be attuned in exchange for the bow of hers." For once I found myself outmatched. A sea of ghosts surrounded the old man, and the walls armored his, and reinforced his words. He had to force the stampede behind every clause. "My comrades will be healed and attuned, of course, if they meet the terms. Those being, serve me for 6 months, during which you cannot harm them or force them to come to harm. Done. Done." The contract space broke apart, and I felt the pull, the drain of my strength, spiraling into them. The old man leaned in to whisper to his comrade, and she reluctantly, slowly laid down her bow. I didn't hear what he said in my weakened state, but I knew what I would say. "Tell your comrade, the swordsman, that he was poisoned. He does not have long to live." I spelled out the words in the purest manner. Fire blazing before them, the woman's face turned pale as her fist clenched. Of course, the old man bobbed his head, grinning like a fool. He had gotten everything he'd ever dreamed of, and clearly his comrade's plight didn't bother him much. But this would. One prize I had won from overflow remained unused, a crown that allowed me to demand a single truthful answer. "Did you leave your blind companion to die?" He opened his mouth and found that he couldn't lie. Against his will, compelled, his mouth formed the words, "I did." And then, released, he began to babble, to try and save himself. "It was the only way. Those spiders would have killed us. I had to make that decision." He turned to the huntress with fear in his eyes, and she met him with a furious, broken howl, lunging up and tackling him to the floor. Her fists came raining down across his face as he tried to shield himself, screamed, tried to bargain, tried to beg. Nothing saved him. She bent over him like a wildcat bends over the prey to rip out its throat. She dug her fingers and claws into his scrawny neck. She held him until the life was gone, his eyes bugging out, his tongue sticking past his teeth, a ludicrous death mask. His legs kicked under her and she went still. and she was left panting, exhausted, crying. I had the last word. Go. Henry was conscious when she returned. Her dull expression gave nothing away. They never even asked how Drug and the others had died, but she knew that she had killed them all. 6 months, serve the dungeon for 6 months, and it will heal your wounds, attune you, and she'd take its offer. She gave them an excuse with the final line. She gave them the blessing not to be seen as weak or accepting. They deserved to walk away from having won something. Not me, no. I have my own arrangements up in the light. Kerora, who was the first to speak, letting his bravado wash over the grim scene. Blood ran from the wound in his gut, and his face seemed more lined than it had been in the light of the nameless cafe. Kerora had said that you were poisoned, that you're going to die soon. His expression darkened for a minute. He blinked once, twice, and then lifted his hand and touched his face. Then that old cocky bastard she knew asserted himself. He found it in him to grin. Then I definitely can't be wasting 6 months in this hole. I won't either. I came down here to, help people. As stupid as that sounds, I thought that I could concoct new cures, make a world a little better. I won't turn back now, and I'm certainly not going to kill anyone on the dungeon's behalf. The alchemist was next to speak. Henry was awake. He lay on the steps drenched in head to toe in his own blood. Nathaniel's bandages and ointments doing their best to stem the flow of his many wounds. I'm going to lose an arm, aren't I? If I don't take this deal, I'm going to. His throat sealed with a dense, wet hiccup of noise, and it wasn't long for a second before he could speak. I think I have to, was all he said. No shame in that, lad. Kerora reached out, taking his hand. Nathaniel clasped the other, his smile on his face as he shook. None at all. I can imagine what you'll see down here. Tiana said nothing. She was overcome. Somehow, in one day, these three had become the closest friends that she'd ever known, and now they were going to be their separate ways. It seemed impossible for her that they were leaving. Some part of her would always remain here, in the dark, in the terrified and desperate struggle, petrified in that eternal moment. It would be a part of her that dreamed, that clutched her mind in darkened hours. She would be returned to the next time she lay her head on the pillow, and the next. Maybe some good could come out of it too. Maybe Nathaniel would help people. Maybe Keora's final days would be glorious. Maybe Henry would teach the dungeon something in his long stay beneath the earth. Maybe. End of chapter. Epilogue Point 1. Dwayne was not a terribly good apprentice. He did the menial bits best, the scrubbing up of the workshop and the polishing of the tools. The other apprentices seemed to loathe the work, but Dwayne relished it, watching the tools slough away the rust and shine until they reflected his face. At the handling of the cooking and cleaning, nobody could hold the candle to Dwayne. His stew was the king of stews, and sometimes there was even real meat in there. He was good at rat-catching, too. It was a bit where they were supposed to be learning smithery from Dwayne lagged behind. His fingers were crude, clumsy things when it came to the feeding of subtle. Give of the metal under the tower, his ears were deaf to the ring of the blade tempered just enough. He could name you every technical aspect of blacksmithing, and still, and yet, and always, he failed. Knowledge never translated into skill, practice never gave way to mastery. His soul never sung in the heat of the forge. He just sweated and cursed and wanted to go home. And go home he would if he didn't learn soon. The master looked at him with disappointment in his eyes. There had been a quiet moment when he was pulled away from the others and, with a sympathetic hand on his shoulder, asked if this was really what he wanted to do. Dwayne didn't know. He had always been a cloudhead, a dreamer. Dwarves had only been one use for the creative types, send them off to the forge. His parents had paid good money to have him apprenticed amongst the best, scrimped and saved for a pair of boots that wouldn't embarrass him amongst the boys of the minor nobility. Put their hopes in him. Damn stupid thing to do. He had stood there, stock-still, statue made out of flesh. The master smith had sighed, taken the hand off his shoulder, and told him, "Run along then." The next time he'd been taken aside, the message had been more clear. "Make something, Dwayne. You're a clever lad, with an interesting mind. I like you, and you've got a life ahead of you, but I have to, Here he paused, punching Dwayne on the shoulder. "I've got to see you show something. anything worth speaking of. Can't have people saying that I put up bad work. Not for swords, not for apprentices. And now Dwayne was past his pits of misery. His plan had been simple: make a ring. A simple enough thing, a ring. You make the metal, you make sure that it's got a hole in the middle, and there you are. But here he underestimated how hard and fiddly work of setting the gems would be. He'd chosen the rich yellow garnets, planned to set them into the flowering shape, but the twisting little wires foiled him at every turn. His fingers were marked with numerous little cuts, having to pause and wipe the metal clean as the blood smeared, and accidentally twisted a bit or that into an alignment process. Damn! Damn! Deep into the night he labored over the workstation, fumbling and fussing and cursing as his tools nicked his fingers. Under the blood and bandages, they were more leaden and useless than ever. Desperation made him shake. The silver and the iron slipped free of his grasp, bouncing across the table down to the floor. He gave up and put his head down and howled in anger and frustration. His hands clawed through his hair. After a long pause, and with a sigh, he got to his knees and started to search. Lifting a candle from the bench, a flickering light illuminated the underside of the work table. A tiny clay man was picking up the spilled gems. It froze as it saw his face, giant by comparison, looming above him. Dwayne was bent sideways, one ear to the ground. His jaw dropped. The little man of clay dropped the contents of its arms. Jewels spilled against the floor, and it turned and ran, lifting his head and bumping it against the tabletop and cursing. Dwayne saw a shadow scuttling up of one of the tall beams that was supported by the roof, and towards the rafters. "No! Wait!" he called out, voice echoing into the empty workshop. Nothing replied. "Little ancestor, please come down. I didn't mean to disturb you. I could use your help." He had heard the stories, although never believed them. Statues come to life in an hour of need, the spirits of ancestors possessing the likeness to guide the younger generation. Well, if now wasn't the hour of need, then what was? He waited, gathering up the spilled yellow garnets, which glinted like bits of sun and the light of his candle. He set them on the bench and bowed. Nothing. He stepped back and turned his head, and then snapped it back around, waiting to see a shadow climbing down. He had never heard of an ancestor spirit being shy. Still, nothing. He let out a weary sigh, consigned to the idea that he had seen a rat and imagined, in his desperation, that he was looking at a spirit. Dwayne hiccuped, and something between the laughter and tears. That would be just like him, wouldn't it? Pleading to a rat to help him. He settled into the great chair where the master sat watching his apprentices. Dwayne was more tired than he realized, and while he'd only meant to rest his eyes, to let himself relax for a moment and steady his hands, although he hadn't intended to. He slept, deeply and soundly, and in his dreams tiny hammers rung, and the rhythm forming the beat of a song so familiar it sounded like home, tasted of his mother's rat stew, and filled the dream space with visions of a childhood. "Hey, get your ass up before the master sees you here, lackskull." "Dwayne!" He was roused from his sleep by a sea of voices, by hands catching him and hauling him from the master's chair. He stumbled onto his feet, blinking his eyes, smacking his lips, and trying to work himself awake. A hand kindly swatted him on the back of his head to make him wake up. "Dwayne!" It was the oldest of the apprentices, Marsa, speaking. He was hunched over Dwayne's work table. Something of his tone was odd, drawing them all one by one to see what he was looking at. It was the most beautiful ring that Dwayne had ever seen. The exterior was rough and dull, made of black crude metal. It was a braided geometric ring, assembled from long diamond shapes segmented of black iron, that fitted one into the next so cleverly that, although none of them carved into the least, they folded into a perfect circle. Here and there the segment was missing, allowing a glimpse inside, past the dark exterior, to where the luminous little wires and the filigree silver ran twisted together, forming a thin vine with delicate little leaves that glinted beneath the hard surface, a treasure within. And at that front of the ring the two halves combined, and the black diamonds were arranged to form the petals of a flower, and the silver vines came bursting out from the center, the pistil and stamen of a jeweled flower, each little twisting shoot tipped by a tear-cut yellow garnet, like a droplet of the sun's golden flames. At the center sat a circular eye of yellow, the flower's heart. Dwayne barely dared to breathe, in case the ring blew away like dust, a dissolution of his fevered mind. "Dwayne, did you make this?" Martha repeated. "It came to me in a dream," he choked out, with tears in his eyes. End of Epilogue. End of Book 1. And that concludes this batch video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the channel, there are numerous ways to do so down below. Until next time, I hope that you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.